Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our panel discussion titled Balancing Progress and Peril Understanding the Challenges and Opportunities of AI in Cybersecurity. Our moderator is Nisha Pillai, international moderator and journalist. Our panelists are Brigadier-General Edward Chen, Defense Cyber Chief, Digital and Intelligence Service, Singapore; Ken Naumann, CEO, NetWitness; Dr. Sadie Creese, Professor of Cybersecurity, Oxford University; Dr. Helmut Reisinger, CEO of EMEA and LATAM, Palo Alto Networks Incorporation; Adam Russell, VP Enterprise and Cloud Security, Oracle. Nisha, over to you.
Thank you very much. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Make yourselves comfortable. This is going to be an awesome panel discussion because we are going to be focusing on a hot topic, which is the challenges and opportunities of AI for cybersecurity. As we all know, ladies and gentlemen, AI is galloping so fast that the threat landscape is changing. We're more vulnerable to attack from outside, but at the same time, there are opportunities to strengthen cyber defenses. We're going to look at the dual nature of AI. Shall we get started? Ken Naumann. So where are we at right now? Has the threat landscape already begun to change because of the use of AI tools by bad actors?
Yeah, thank you, Nisha, for asking me the question. First, I'd like to thank the GCF, and I'm honored to be here. This is a conference that I attended last year, and now it is on my calendar. I view this conference as one of the most valuable conferences that I attend each year. Nisha, to answer your question, I think in two words, it's emphatically yes. The threat landscape has changed significantly as AI has progressed. You know, I think as we all know, there's a big job gap in terms of cybersecurity talent, and AI will have this democratization effect as it relates to being able to hire, retain, train cyber analysts, et cetera. But the same thing's happening on the other side of the fence, where bad actors are also able to utilize AI to democratize their skill sets. And as that progresses, it's going to have a cascading effect, not only in the amount of sophisticated hacks, but also the number of hacks. It's going to lower the barrier to entry in terms of the amount of technological knowledge that it takes to do something bad. Secondly, I would say that, as that bar continues to lower, not only are nation states going to have, who are bad actors, more availability, but what I really am concerned about is the teenager in his room, somebody who is a very unsophisticated, what I'll call lone wolf, that will have the technology accessible to him to really be a significantly bad actor.
So lowering the bar, democratization of threat, it sounds like a good thing, but it isn't, is it? Helmut Reisinger, may I ask you how you see this? Is AI accelerating the threat landscape?
Yeah, absolutely. Good afternoon, everybody. It's accelerating, particularly since the launch of generative AI. In that context, let me just state as well that we, as the #1 cybersecurity company, have been doing AI, what we called machine learning, for more than 10 years. But what do we see? We see since the launch of ChatGPT, and now there is about 600 of these tools out there, particularly used by the Generation Z, that there's 3 impacts: speed, scale, and sophistication. Give you 2 data points on speed. With the likes of generative AI on the bad side of the house, you can create ransomware instead of 12 hours, now in just 3 hours. In 1.5 years, it's going to be, with the way how things are going in development, it's going to be just 15 minutes. Another thing in terms of speed on the bad side, if you're a public organization, if you're a private enterprise, the time between compromise, which means somebody enters into your systems, and exfiltration of data is shrinking. 2 years ago, it was about 9 days. Now, in more than 50% of the cases where we are called in emergency as well, it's below 24 hours. So this is speed. Scale, what we have seen is around about the time 6 of AI-driven ransomware attacks. This leads to the impact that last year we saw, because we see telemetry data from firewalls, networks, our cloud assets, our endpoints. We had seen 1.5 million new attacks every day. This year, August, it's 2.3 million every day.
Wow.
And sophistication, last example. You have heard about the deepfake leveraging of different nation-state attackers. One of the big worries in our industry, in let's call it the Western world, is hiring knowledge workers who might have a wrong profile. The famous case of a big IT company in the US hiring, finally it was a North Korean agent, but with a fake identity, stolen and leveraged and tuned, deep-faked, if I may call it like this, with generative AI. So on the threat landscape, unfortunately, acceleration on speed, scale, and sophistication.
Thanks. You put that very well, Helmut. So, we know Gen AI for its predictive capabilities, right? We probably all used it in that way. So, Professor Sadie, may I ask you about whether you see bad actors using those predictive capabilities to target their victims better?
Yes, absolutely. So just building on previous points, there's something particularly potent about the capabilities that are being delivered this way. And so if you can imagine, we always use machine learning, whichever flavor it is, to try and develop insight into very large data to enable us to make predictions about the world, for whatever reason that is. So you can imagine, in the hands of threat actors, that means any kind of cyber weaponry that requires them to try and predict their victims in some way, they're going to get a massive performance enhancement on. So their weapons will get more potent. To give you some examples, profiling so that you can create deep fakes. In the same way, we've seen strong evidence of really quite scarily sophisticated phishing attempts that are so much better targeted towards their victims, and you can expect that to grow. And phenomenally, and that, of course, is driven partially by large language models, but in multimodal, you can expect that to be visual too. So anything that requires some kind of anticipation of our behavior on the threat side, they're going to get much, much better at.
Yeah, and we're all creatures of habit, aren't we? So
Right.
it can be modeled in that way. I don't know if you recall, ladies and gentlemen, but in the very first session of today, we heard from Sir Jeremy Fleming, the former head of GCHQ, who said that tech companies are housing way more data than intelligence services. So that brings me on to my question to Adam Russell from Oracle. So Oracle holds a lot of data, right, as one of the big cloud platform suppliers. What are you seeing in terms of AI-enabled attacks?
So first and foremost, as we've expanded our footprint in Oracle from a database company to being a cloud service provider, the main thing that it enables us to do is see broader breadth and additionally the depth. We don't have control of our customer ecosystems per se, but we have the periphery signal. You can think of a cloud service provider as a telecommunication provider, plugging in jacks in the old school manner. So we have the ability to see attacks happening on the periphery of our network, and it gives us leverage. What we're seeing is a multitude of things, from what our panelists here have already called out, attacking the individual, delivering and leveraging ChatGPT to craft social engineering campaigns, to attacking large-scale organizations, including Oracle itself. One particular example that we saw on the defensive side was leveraging what's called dark AI or GPT models to craft attacks against an organization. We saw this attack against broad landscape of our APIs, where they were trying to automate fuzzing routines across our global fleet. And it was an interesting attack for us to counter because they're using instrumentation of routers globally to look for weaknesses in our APIs. We're able to partner, and this goes into how do we actually defend and mitigate these attacks. We partnered with our peers, Microsoft, Google, Azure of the world, as well as nation states across the community to shut down those routes. But it goes into the defensive capabilities and actually leveraging the information. So on our end, we have a full stack of information, and we use machine learning and AI techniques to pull that information out and look for the counter adversary attacking us or our customers.
Fascinating. We've been hearing about multi-stakeholder every day, haven't we? Well, there's a perfect example of it, multi-stakeholder work. Now, we haven't yet heard from Brigadier-General Edward Chen, and you might be wondering who he is. Well, he is the Defense Cyber Chief of the Singapore Army, which, like all armies, has got the normal three branches, Army, Navy, and Air Force, but it also has a separate digital intelligence service, and that's the bit that Brigadier-General Edward is under. He's in charge of all the cyber defenses. So, Brigadier-General, what are the implications that you're seeing of Gen AI for cyber defense, in particular when it comes to threat modeling?
Thank you, Nisha. I think first I'd like to thank GCF for this invitation, and really it's wonderful to be here in this very lovely kingdom. Back to the question, I'd like to start by sharing a story. Early last year, I met a 25-year-old white hat in San Francisco. He was the first white hat to find a publicly known critical vulnerability in ChatGPT. But what was interesting is when I asked him, why did he, of all systems, decide to target, and research ChatGPT? His answer was a very simple but meaningful one. He said that, to him, ChatGPT is the new internet. So I think to answer your question, I'll see the implications from cyber for AI in three lenses. One, terrain. Two, threat. And the third, about teams. First, terrain. As AI become increasingly mainstream, we need to incorporate tools and skill sets to defend them well. But the challenge is that when you put AI vis-a-vis IT, OT, and now AI, you must think of it as a third pillar that we need to learn how to defend well. Secondly, on threat, you mentioned about threat modeling. I think the key point is about to understand the different unique AI-related threat vectors and how do we defend them. So some of these threat vectors range from data poisoning all the way to new ones like prompt injection attacks. How do we leverage some of this knowledge, adopt frameworks like MITRE Atlas frameworks, as well as OWASP Top 10 for large language model to defend them well. Last but not least, in terms of teams, I think it's really how do we leverage the teams, not within just the government, but really the industry as well, to defend this well.
Great, thank you very much for giving us a military perspective on it. So if we go to most AI conferences, cybersecurity is not at the heart of it, right? What's at the heart of it is how can organizations leverage Gen AI, LLMs, machine learning to improve their own services and their own productivity, right? And that's a good thing. But what an impact is that going to have in terms of their own vulnerability to cyber attack? That's what I next want to put to you. So Ken Naumann, can I ask you first, does the increased adoption of Gen AI assets by organizations, governments, private sector, make them more vulnerable to attack?
Yeah, I think it does. For a few reasons. One is, there's not enough transparency in terms of how these models are being built. What data is actually going in the models, whose data is being used, et cetera. Secondly, I think the regulatory agencies haven't necessarily caught up to the risk. There's throughout the EU and some in the United States, there's beginning, the beginnings of actually creating a regulatory structure around AI is starting to take place, but it needs to happen faster. The governments and the people who are ultimately responsible for protecting society, I think are a few years behind here. And
it's interesting to hear you say that, because when you look at it from the AI vendors' point of view, they're saying, no, we don't want to go too fast with the regulation. But in terms of the cybersecurity perspective, it's a good thing, right?
Yeah, I think it is a good thing. I also think, there hasn't been an establishment of case law either around, who's going to ultimately own the culpability when something goes bad with AI. And as certain cases start to work their way through the courts, we're going to start getting some more definition around, what the real monetary risk of incorporating these types of technologies are. In the U.S., there was a recent IP case around ChatGPT and some of the data they were using. I think, those types of litigation matters are going to be much more prevalent in the future.
Okay. I can see you nodding, Professor Sadie. How do you see the adoption of AI as an asset by organizations possibly having vulnerabilities?
Very challenging. Of course, this is happening, and AI in the form of advanced machine learning and whatever other types we end up using, it is going to radically change our environment, and it will help us solve some of the biggest challenges we face. There's something very inherently different about the way in which it works. And that means, yes, all new technology comes with some vulnerability. We know that. We have practices. We have to do some catching up. But I wanted to share with you some insights around the specific, there's new ways in which this stuff is vulnerable that's different to existing technology, and it challenges some of the way in which we do security operations, and by that I mean network defense.
Please
do. It's really important that we try and get this stuff shipped into the marketplace so we can procure it with as little vulnerability as possible. That's the kind of safety agenda. But it's also really important that we are realists and we understand there's always some attacks that get in. We have to be able to do threat detection, recovery, response in the name of business resilience. And there's inherently differences around the nature of the machine learning assets and the algorithms and the technology that make things like threat detection hard to do, and we don't currently know how. But just to say that one of the projects that we're undertaking at Oxford with the World Economic Forum is tightly focused on beginning to understand how these risks are emerging, what's driving them, to provide some contextualized guidance to organizations that are already thinking about moving from experimentation with AI into deployment phases. And so there's ongoing work thinking about how you do the ops. There's also some ongoing R&D work that's going to hopefully, fingers crossed, bring some urgently needed product to the marketplace in the coming months. So I hope
watch that
we'll
space.
be here next year to talk about that.
Absolutely. Helmut Reisinger, how can organizations rethink their protocols to make sure that they use their AI assets more securely?
So in our view, whilst we are talking here, every second word today is AI out in the world, we are still in the beginning of it in corporate adoption. I would even say it's the Wild West at the moment. I was not so long ago with a CEO of a big European critical infrastructure company. And we talked about the adoption of generative AI. And he said, no, we blocked it. We gave out the guidelines that people are not allowed to use it. Right, Mr. CTO, who was sitting here? And he said, yes, we did the guideline, but we cannot guarantee, I cannot guarantee it. So this is one thing. On the other hand, you have 57% of the knowledge workers, even more so the younger ones, who are adopting generative AI already in their job.
Yeah. So whatever the bosses are saying, the younger people are going to be doing it anyway.
Absolutely. Without you as potentially doing your AI and digital transformation, not even realizing it. Okay? Because historically, when you introduced a new application, IT was fully responsible, you rolled it out, and you said, okay, Mrs. or Mr. X, you are now ready to use it, here is the download, etc. With Gen AI, you can use corporate content, you plug it on your own private account, and you try to run something with it. Or to do, for example, AI-generated code. So that's why we think we need to bring order from a cybersecurity standpoint into this Wild West. How do we do it? We give 3 modules. One is called AI Access, which gives you complete control who is using what when. And if you say, this is not allowed, then it's blocked. The issue is, namely, you might sit in Riyadh because your headquarters is here, but your subsidiary in Australia or maybe in Brazil, there's young generation there, and there's 600 of these tools out there. How to keep up with this pace of this beginning of this revolution is going to be difficult. So it's AI access, AI security posture management, that you have a complete overview, and AI runtime security. Again, we try to give you the tool set to accompany you in that journey wherever you are on these steps. And allow me one word about AI-generated code, because you hinted to that. This is where we believe as well, it's a huge topic that you can import the risk into it. Why? Every coder, whether he sits here in the Middle East, or he sits in Seattle, or he sits in Brisbane, they're using open source components. And 70% of these open source components is anyhow used in this programming, and they're from the internet. If one of these libraries contain malware, you import it first into your coding phase, then into your infrastructure phase in the cloud, then your runtime. So it's prevalent that you have good quality data to get to good outcomes on AI security, and then as well to apply the right mechanisms to get order in this Wild West.
Okay, thanks,
Good
Helmut.
data is a prerequisite for running good cybersecurity on AI.
So Adam, I'm just going to bring Adam in first, Sadie, if you don't mind. Put this into context for us. How worried should organizations be then about the adoption of new AI tools by themselves or by their employees?
I'll probably give a slightly more boring answer, which is it depends on the organizational construct and how mature your organization is when it comes to supplier management, data governance. Because you can think of AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, GPT models as just another supplier to your organization as a whole. Now, that probably covers 80%, and if you do that really well on your data flows, where your data is transacted, and to my peers' points, if you have managed devices, managed networks, and you have the ability to shut off those flows accordingly and provide your employees paved paths, you're in a much better state than most organizations globally. However, there's that 20% surface, which has been discussed here, which if you're developing new models in your organization or transacting with models where the contract isn't really known with a particular company, you're going to have to start asking the hard questions to your supplier. And that gets into data poisoning attempts if you're building your own models, or prompt injection attacks. You need to start covering those down with your internal security team, your data governance organization, if you have one, or your technology arm and application owners. So I think when we start applying technology to AI coming into your organization without understanding your organizational construct, you're going to end up in a bad position. So at least at Oracle, we have a very mature, some might say rigid, supplier management process, but we know every supplier that comes into Oracle, and we vet them accordingly, and we also try to kind of get some suppliers out who are not managing their supply chain themselves.
So it's like basic hygiene protocols need to be there. That's what I'm taking from
That's
you.
about
Okay.
80% of it, and then the other 20% is
Very briefly, Sadie, because I have to bring Brigadier-General in as well.
Just building on that, I think the room should be aware that the shadow AI is really important. It relates to hygiene. And one of the things we must all have our eye on is this, that in the past 25 years, the biggest, most harmful attacks undoubtedly had some human vector in there somewhere, either unknowingly or knowingly. I come from an era where we used to have something called air gap systems before we realized that humans crossed the gap, right? And that you know, you'd have hardware without the USB ports so nobody could accidentally cross that gap. We need to have one eye on the fact that AI, as it interfaces with humans, there is a new way to cross the gap. So shadow AI, governance and hygiene, it's not all technology, it's not all human, it's both. If you speak to anyone that thinks it's one or the other, they're wrong.
Right.
And we must have our eye on that now. Because it's
Okay,
going
so
to be
you
potent.
heard it here, shadow AI. Brigadier-General Edward. Now we're going to do a little corner turn here, ladies and gentlemen, because I want to hear about the cyber attack simulations you're planning. So like all armies, the Singapore Army conducts annual exercises, military exercises. We're used to hear about them. But those include cyber attack simulations, and I believe you're going to be injecting an AI element into your next simulation. So tell us about it.
Okay. Maybe to set the context, we hold a whole range of the different cyber exercises of different magnitudes. One of the largest in Singapore is actually organized by the DIS together with the CSA, our National Cybersecurity Agency. And what is very unique is that this exercise is a live force-on-force with live red team, simulating across multiple IT and OT systems. But like you mentioned, this year, one of the highlights is that we're going to build a dedicated AI test bed inbuilt between this simulation. And what we're going to do, we're going to launch a whole range of AI-specific threat vectors that we mentioned just now, from prompt injection attacks, and a whole range to exploit this system. I think the whole intent is to allow our cyber defenders to have a first-hand understanding of how does an attack really look like in an AI system, what are the spillover effects to the rest of the networks, and more importantly, how can they detect early and mitigate and do the necessary response measures.
Well, please come back next year and tell us all about how it worked out, Brigadier General. So it's been kind of negative so far, our discussion, hasn't it, ladies and gentlemen? Let's now look at the potential. Let's see how we can deploy Gen AI assets to actually build better cyber defenses. Because it's definitely possible, right, Helmut Reisinger? How can we use Gen AI machine learning tools to improve cyber defenses?
Yeah. So indeed, it could look very negative. The reason why I'm optimistic for the defense side is because we have better data. But you need to have good data in order to be able to defend yourself well against this increasing AI-driven threat. We say as well, you need to fight AI with AI. So our approach to it is we need to provide you, whether you're public or private enterprise, with real-time cybersecurity. Remember, time is shrinking, speed. Second, it needs to be highly automated, not to replace people, but to enable the people to do the right things, and the stuff that can be automated, reduction of false positives, this needs to be done by machines and by AI. And third, it needs to be done on a modular platformization way, because telemetry data is coming in from firewalls, from networks, from cloud assets, from endpoint. This can be a machine, whatever. Can be a tank from the army, for example. So this is why you need good data. To give you one number, we are collecting at Palo Alto every day 7.6 petabytes of telemetry data, cyber telemetry data. This, if you have good data, we call it then, we stitch it, so you organize the data, because then you can model it, and you run your playbooks with it. This leads to outcomes, in the case of a very global organization, 600,000 people, 320,000 endpoints, of doing our AI-driven security operations as a solution of 3.5 days to 19 minutes in the meantime to response. That's not possible.
Say that again, from what to what?
3.5 days, after 2 months deployment, 3.5 days was the average time of meantime to remediate an incident in the security operations
3.5 days
center to 19 minutes.
Wow.
So you see the impact of AI.
The potential is huge, yeah.
You need to have good data. And we take the data from what we see across our customers, but we also scan the internet on a permanent basis. And all of this together, then you compare it, you take out the benefit, and that's what we call precision AI. You know, everybody talks about generative AI. In cyber, we think you should be rather precise. What's bad is bad, and you take it out. So.
I'm sure you'll be wanting to find out more in private from Helmut, ladies and gentlemen. But now I'm going to ask Adam, Are you using Gen AI, machine learning tools in this way at Oracle to keep your cloud offerings secure?
And we definitely are. And I had a sidebar conversation before coming on to the stage and realized that Oracle was doing this back in the 90s. But one of the things we do, to expand on what my peer was saying, is it's not just the remediation or detection aspect, it's also cutting out the churn of reporting. What you find in organizations is, I need a report for the CEO, I need a presentation for the board, I need ... And if you're talking to an analyst, all they care about is the ones and zeros, and if you can automate the description flow for the audience that you're presenting to, it gets your technical subject matter experts on the things that really matter and allows your executives to present accordingly. So we've used that internally at Oracle for the past few years already with outstanding success. And when we were talking earlier, the other thing it enables is to train analysts how to communicate. So that's a very empowering conversation for career growth as well for men and women alike. And then finally, I'll say on the fraud and abuse ecosystem, we've been leveraging it for 2 years now for detecting network anomaly events throughout Oracle to look for fraudsters and people that are doing account takeovers of Oracle customers, and it's been tremendously successful.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a practical tool right now. Thank you. Brigadier General, can I ask you about something that people may not be aware of, and that is that they have conscription in Singapore. 18-year-olds have to spend 2 years in the armed forces, but not just in the armed forces, also things like the fire services and in cybersecurity defenses. So how do you see the use of Gen AI tools being embraced by these young kids who are joining your team?
I think for us, we see this as an opportunity because I think AI technology, by default, I think is, to us, a force multiplier, allows every soldier to be more effective. At the same time, these young kids, at the age of 18, I think they are very AI native. They learn how to use generative AI tools now in school, and when they come into the military, they are very...
They're ready, aren't they?
Ready. But at the same time, there's also a nuance. What we think is that with the emergence of AI tools, the focus will shift from finding the answers to actually asking the right questions. So what this will not change from a talent development perspective. How do you develop young talents like this, identify them, and continue to hone them from the skill set of really knowing how to find the right ask the right question, and especially in a cyber incident.
Which is using that predictive power,
Yes.
Isn't it? Sort of embodying it themselves. That's a very interesting thought, Brigadier General. Professor Sadie, we heard in the last panel from Akshay from the World Economic Forum, and I saw you said, I know him. Now, you are working with the World Economic Forum, aren't you, on the impact of AI on cybersecurity, a big project. Where have you got to? Can you share any of the findings with us?
Yes, it's been a big undertaking. I probably can't share findings. I'm not going to look for Akshay. He'll be nodding no. But they'll be launching soon. It's involved a huge number of stakeholders from business as well as international organizations around the world, and deliberately focusing on digging very deep into what's changing, influencing risks, the factors that will shape the environment that organizations wanting to use AI will find themselves in, thinking very hard about the kinds of multidisciplinary teams that are going to need to be involved. We've been talking about that, emerging it. It's not just tech, it's governance too. It's security function, human function, legal function, and then producing some insights that will really help organizations try and effectively oversee this risk as they move to getting this into deployment.
Thank you. So I think that's another one. Come back and tell us next year. Ken Naumann, I'm going to give you the final word. When we step back from all this, there are clearly threats out there which most organizations barely understand. There are also opportunities. There are young children who think, and young people who think in a completely different way to our generation. So putting this all together, do you think that most large organizations and governments, decision makers, have woken up to the increased vulnerabilities that they face because of Gen AI and machine learning?
I think they're beginning to. And I do honestly feel there's a long way to go, right? And I feel that it's the unknown. Like, we don't know exactly where this technology is going to take us. So, you know, as people become more used to working with these types of technologies, I think you're going to start to get more of a better understanding of what types of guardrails need to be put in place. You know, right now, I think...
What types of guardrails?
Guardrails. You know, Helmut described it as the Wild West, and I would tend to agree. But I don't think it's too late for us to actually put the appropriate guardrails in place, figure out how AI, as it relates to cyber, is going to be, you know, a tool that's going to allow us to take a quantum leap in terms of protecting our societies. And ultimately, you know, I certainly feel, you know, the optimist in me, that we're going to manage this new, great, exciting technology appropriately. So it's ultimately going to do more good than harm. But for us to do that, we really have to understand and take the risk seriously. And, you know, the way we develop the guidelines around mitigating that risk, that needs to come from a private-public partnership. Companies need to be partnering with governments, vice versa, and we have to get, you know, what I would consider a more comprehensive set of regulations and more strict guardrails in terms of how we're going to govern this technology in the future.
Thank you for drawing our discussion together so adroitly, Ken Naumann. I have learned a huge amount, and I'm sure you have too. Shall we show our appreciation for our final panelists, Brigadier-General Edward Ken Naumann, Professor Sadie, Helmut Reisinger, and Adam Russell?